No one knows how it began. The world was normal. I mean, sure, we had a war in Europe, but even with all the guns and artillery, Europe could not be redeemed. Additionally, the large amount of manpower made it ripe for the undead. Allegedly, Europe was the first place to fall. It was so quick, in fact, that the only transmission that appeared across the world was the dead survive. From there, the rest of the world fell apart. America was hit hard, reeling from the ongoing war and the rampant sickness of recent months. We had no chance. It was first spotted in Annesburg, and when investigated by the Marshal Service, they were attacked by what seemingly were the dead. With this unprecedented turn of events, the attacks only grew. Next was Van Horn, where a group of individuals were alerted that Van Horn had fallen. Next was an attack on Saint Denis. It was clear that we were outmanned and outgunned. We stood no hope for what came next. The last transmission from the White House was that it had fallen. One thought was on everyone's mind, was that America was no longer a beacon of freedom. No one had any idea what that meant. How could we? Word got out that we were under attack. People mustered together, armed with rifles, repeaters, and pitchforks, and marched on the capital. What happened was inevitable. Sure enough, the dead were attacking us, as the president had acclaimed, and we were unprepared. The next day was D-Day, more commonly known as Dead Day. The first to fall were the towns. Like a plague, the dead infection was spread like wildfire by jumping state lines, rivers, and the waste of armadillo like child's play. It was indiscriminate and fatal if caught. Many people took their own lives to prevent the torment of hunting loved ones in a bout of unsatiable hunger. Next to fall were the stores. All the food was rot and mold. The death toll was in the hundreds of thousands. Medical supply was drained quickly. Ammo stores were plunging to dangerous levels within the first week. The army quickly had to resort to fixing bayonets and charging the undead, only to add to the death toll. America quickly became undefended. Rank, title, and position quickly became obsolete, and the chaos ensued. Looting and sacking of buildings were common, just in order to survive. Pockets of survivors were not commonplace, and the dead outnumbered the living, 50 to 1. The government was in the wind within the first fortnight, having meetings in secret trying to organise the next move or planning for the bleak future that we had no choice but to embrace. Things quickly became difficult the more people that were killed and added to the horde. Additionally, with the horde growing bigger and their hunger that could not be matched, the wildlife ceased to be fruitful after the first month. After a month or so, people had somewhat adapted to being rung down the food chain, and no longer the apex predator. They had grown crops of food and orchards of fruits, tapped into the supply of white meat from fishing the flat iron lake. Cattle was herded and used for milk, and cheeses, and other dairy goods. Humanity was taking its first steps to being free from oppression. Whilst everyone pitched in and did their bit, one man stood above all else. The President of the United States of America lived up to his Commander-in-Chief title regardless of if it was now redundant and long forgotten. He organised a large group of survivors based out of Pronghorn Ranch, where they had set up a camp for all refugees. Hundreds of people from across the states flocked to the ranch for safety, salvation, and above all else, food. About 2 months into the undead attack was the first major catastrophe to hit the already stricken pocket of humanity. The drought famine was widespread and relentless. All the crops that were being grown died without real cause. It was unprecedented and merciless. Hay became scarce and feeding the horses became impossible. 90% of all horses in the country died from starvation a week into the famine. Everything was somewhat quiet for the following months, until summer, when the next calamity hit was the Great Fire. A wildfire of a magnitude never seen in this part of America was heading in from the west, and nothing could stop it. It was running through the states west of Armadillo and Blackwater, and leaving nothing in its wake. The undead were dealt their first major loss of power, and the humans came out on top. The trackers, lumberjacks, and natives of the group knew how to read the wind and terrain to help avoid the fire front. However, nothing could be done for Lymphony, which was hit directly by the front and was razed to the ground once more. The fire got to the flat iron lake and had nowhere to go, and quickly extinguished itself. What came next was what turned the tide of this invasion. An event that took place known as the Starving eradicated all undead. Not much is known about the undead. We knew that regular folk who died to the undead were reanimated to join the Legion. We knew that they would shrug off most bullets and sharp objects slashing and stabbing. What we didn't know was that the hundreds and thousands of dead without a food source would starve. As the people returned, the food source that sustained the undead was compromised, and the starving started. It took a full month for the undead army to be brought to its knees. Due to the lack of sustenance, the dead were in a weakened state and easy to slay. The army was reformed under old leadership. Gunsmiths had been preparing for this day since the start. The surviving horses were saddled up and ready for battle, bayonets sharpened, and men, women, and children alike were ready for payback, ready to take back what was rightfully theirs. The movement of man was ready for war. The Survivor Coalition was formed and marched on the last pocket of undead in Saint Denis. The Battle of Saint Denis was over as quickly as it started. The Survivor Coalition was victorious, and the undead nightmare ended in November 1904, with the President of the United States hoisting the Star-Spangled Banner above the White House. Now, it's been a year since the start of this dark page in history. 1904 is already nearly over. However, we got our freedom back. The Survivors Coalition started to rebuild before its re-inauguration to a diplomatic government once more. The elects of the last term were sworn back in and ready to help rebuild the nation one step at a time. While life was returning to normal, one common phrase was on everyone's lips. Life finds a way. This is a short story about America's battle with the undead. What's your story of this undead nightmare?